I'm sure there's some luck involved in my not being caught in an avalanche for decades. But I'd like to share some tips that I believe have helped me avoid being caught in avalanches in the backcountry. Some of these tips I've been practicing for decades, others I've learned more recently. But before we get into the tips, let's not forget the basics. Take a training course or two, get the bulletin before you go, and know how to use the transceiver, shovel, and probe that we always carry in the backcountry. In addition, airbags have their advantages, but let's leave that discussion for another time. Notice that these tips are to reduce the risk, that is, to help us avoid being caught in an avalanche, especially a large avalanche. We cannot eliminate avalanche risk in most backcountry winter trips, largely because there is uncertainty in the stability of the snowpack. Okay, let's look at tip number 1. 1. Make the most of non-avalanche terrain. First, many uproutes can avoid most avalanche terrain while still giving you a chance to get a look at descent routes and have a poke at the snowpack that is similar to your descent route. While riding down, for sure, avalanche terrain offers spectacular riding, but we have to pick the right days for terrain like this. The point of this tip is that there's a lot of fine riding on slopes that are not steep enough to slide and don't have avalanche hazards over your head. It's a matter of optimizing and enjoying non-avalanche terrain. Look at these alpine slopes. Here are a couple of fine lines that are not in avalanche terrain. With modern fat skis and snowboards, there's a lot of spectacular riding on slopes that are not steep enough to slide. Tip 2. Avalanche bulletins contain important information to help us select appropriate terrain. It's one thing to read the bulletin, but we also have to use it to help us choose good days for those big open slopes and the days to back off the big terrain. This bulletin says moderate at treeline and low below treeline. Right away I know I can find some good riding with limited avalanche risk. However, on days like this, I'll usually head to a ski area or the Nordic trails. Tip 3 is about choosing terrain when the avalanche danger is considerable. Let's put this into perspective by starting with low danger. When the avalanche danger is low, there's a lot of places to ride. Conditions are right for big lines. However, let's face it, sometimes riding sucks when the danger is low. For example, there may be a bomber or breakable crust. When the avalanche danger is moderate, I back off some big terrain, but there's still places in this photo where I can find low-risk riding on big slopes. For me, considerable avalanche danger is a different can of worms. Look at this graph of Canadian recreational fatal accidents. More avalanche accidents happen when the danger is considerable, even though moderate is a more common rating. The graph for the US is likely similar. Why is there a big jump in accidents from moderate danger to considerable? Because we don't back off our terrain choices as much as we should. Most days, when the danger is considerable, I'll restrict my terrain choices. Not a little, but a lot. Tip 4 is about snowpack variability. When there is a persistent slab problem, and there often is in a continental snow climate, snowpack variability scares the crap out of me because there are more thin spots where I can trigger an avalanche. See the ski tracks? Skiers triggered an avalanche under the thin slab somewhere to the right of the arrow. The crack in the persistent weak layer propagated to where the slab was thick to the right of this photo. Yes, this is the same avalanche. 2 people died as a result of the avalanche. So how can we anticipate highly variable slab depth? Well, the bulletin sometimes tells us. In the field, we can also look for wind effect on the snow surface or rocks sticking through the snow surface, as in this photo. And we can probe to see if the snowpack depth to the ground or to crusts is highly variable. Yes, the probe that we carry for avalanche rescue can help us detect the depth to crusts and the ground. With practice, we can detect other hardness differences in the snowpack. So, where and when there is high snowpack variability, I back off my terrain choices. Tip 5. I read an article recently that said you should pick your travel partners by their skill at companion rescue. Rescue skills are important, But first and foremost, I choose my travel companions by their ability to make consistent, cautious decisions, that is, their skill at staying out of avalanches. I look for humility in my travel companions. It is best to be with people who listen to the thoughts of everyone in the group and are good at reaching consensus. I have found women tend to make more consistent, cautious decisions than many young guys. Guys who are dads are probably also more cautious than young guys without kids. If you travel in the backcountry in a group of young guys without kids, then the next tip may be especially relevant. Tip 6. Use a checklist or decision aid. These vary from a pocket card to a location-based smartphone app. This is the Prepare, Plan, Ride, Debrief framework from ARI. Here is Avalanche Canada's Evaluator. This is the graph from Bruce Tremper's Pocket Guide. And this is the White Risk smartphone app from Switzerland, which includes the Safer 6 checklist. There are many others. Which should you use? I suggest starting with the method introduced on your recreational avalanche course. Get the hang of it before you try other methods that are applicable in your area. The important thing about these methods is that your group stops to consider the bulletin, weather, snowpack, terrain, and how each person feels about riding on the terrain ahead. The process of stopping, systematically considering the factors at play, and listening to each person in the group is powerful for reducing your avalanche risk while enjoying the mountains in winter.